There's one thing about video games that always stands out. It's the fact that they aren't real. Sure, at most, they'll simply look real. Graphics have advanced so much that it sometimes genuinely can be hard to distinguish a high-quality in-game screenshot to a real-life photograph. Upon saying that, Far Cry 5 comes to mind immediately. While the character models do give it away, if you solely pay attention to the landscapes, the mountains, the water, you could genuinely fool an old man into believing it were real. But while that controller is in your hands, you subconsciously understand that it's not real. And most games realize this. They know that the game isn't real. That's why most games don't bother questioning the choices you decide to make within them. And neither does the player. Think back on the times you went on murdering sprees in Hitman or sliced someone's throat in Assassin's Creed. I guarantee that not even for a second did you stop and think about the consequences that comes with killing those people, how it would affect the world around you, or how their loved ones would react after finding out they've been killed. And it's not your fault for failing to take that into consideration. Those games don't force you to, but there's one game that does. It's a game that isn't afraid to challenge the player's sense of morality, forcing them to battle with ethical dilemmas in ways most games don't. It's a game where every choice you make holds weight to it, causing you to think twice before you murder an entire room of men and women. That game would be none other than Dishonored. Dishonored instantly became a classic within the stealth game genre, largely thanks to its satisfying gameplay, the sheer amount of freedom it gives players, and the creative world building it bestows. Throughout its development, one singular question lingered in the air. Who would you become if you were given levels of power that would render you unstoppable? The answer resides in Corvo Attano, the man we play as throughout the duration of the base game. The catch is that there's no definitive answer. Instead, there's thousands of potential answers, and the means to finding them lives in how you choose to approach the game. Will you become a merciless killer, causing havoc in the city of Dunwall? Will you be sympathetic and spare your enemies? Maybe you'll be somewhere in between. Ultimately, Dishonored elucidates that morality is rarely black and white. Instead, it's incredibly ambiguous. And in order to experience true freedom, one must drop any sense of morality, as it's nothing but a limitation. Through its narrative, level design, and gameplay mechanics, the game illustrates that your actions are not simply inputs on a controller, but real choices that will be followed with a consequence. To understand anything I'll discuss in this video, it's important to provide some context about what's happening in the story. The game opens up through the eyes of a man named Corvo Attano, who will be the character you play as throughout the duration of the base game. He reunites with his daughter Emily Caldwin, as well as an empress named Jessamine Caldwin, who he serves as the royal protector for. As we're making our way to the Empress, we stumble across 3 more characters which will be vital in the story. Those characters would be Anton Sokolov, High Overseer Campbell, and the Lord Regent. Moments after interacting with the Empress, she gets killed by a man we'll later find out is named Daud, and they proceed to kidnap Emily. Campbell and the Lord Regent see this as an opportunity to frame Corvo for their own selfish reasons. Corvo is then sent to Coldridge Prison, where he'll be tortured for 6 months straight. One day, the Lord Regent states that Corvo is to be executed, but luckily for Corvo, some supposed friends of his decided to help him escape Coldridge Prison, where he'll have to strategically maneuver around guards and make his way through the sewers. You'll eventually encounter a man named Samuel, who will take you to a place called the Hound Pits Pub, where you'll be introduced to a group of people called the Loyalists. The most important figures in this group are Admiral Havelock, Lord Trevor Pendleton, and a man named Martin, who you'll free from confinement. These are the people that helped you escape, and they'll now help you save Emily, as well as pursue anyone associated with the Lord Regent. These people consist of Campbell, the leader of a religious organization called the Abbey of the Everyman, an interesting pair of siblings called the Pendleton Twins, the genius inventor Sokolov, the almighty Lady Boyle, the Lord Regent himself, and of course, Daud. You'll also receive a gift from a strange man called the Outsider, which will allow you to use supernatural powers. Not only will he give you these powers, but he'll also give you a heart that contains Jessamine's spirit, which can give you vital information, whether it be gameplay or story related.
He has spied upon Callista as she bathes, more than once.
The game takes place in a city called Dunwall, which has an ongoing rat plague terrorizing the streets. As you traverse through this peculiar city, you'll quickly be introduced to something called the Chaos System, which is essentially just a morality system. Kill as little people as possible and you'll get low chaos. Kill everyone in sight and you'll get high chaos. The Chaos System makes it seem as if one way of playing is better than the other, which contradicts the idea that morality is ambiguous. By painting morality as this rigid black and white idea, it fails to take into account nuance and moral gray areas. There's several reasons why Corvo wouldn't spare his enemies, especially High Overseer Campbell, the Lord Regent, and Daud. Campbell and the Lord Regent blatantly admitted to Corvo's face that they're aware of the fact that he's innocent, and yet they still continue to tarnish his reputation and torture him for 6 months straight. Why on earth would Corvo even consider sparing these people when they blatantly ruined his life? Daud killed Jessamine, the woman Corvo loves, right before his eyes, and also captured Emily. Is it really that insane for Corvo to refuse to spare this man? Sure, we as the player understand that Daud turned over a new leaf, but Corvo doesn't know that. The only thing he thinks of when he thinks of Daud is the fact that he murdered the Empress. He doesn't think anything good of anyone else that's involved either, like Lady Boyle and the Pendleton twins. In his eyes, they're just as guilty as Daud. Then there's the Overseers, who you could argue are simply doing their jobs. They too were misled by the Lord Regent's corruption, so they don't know any better. Killing these people may be morally questionable, as they're simply going off what they were told. The Chaos system lacks this level of nuance. It's a system that merely looks at the number of kills you've accumulated without taking into account the context. To make matters worse, the Loyalists blatantly betray Corvo towards the middle of the game, in which he only survives because Samuel only gave us half the dose of poison. Corvo already went through hell and back for 6 months, and when he finally found people he thought he could trust, they stabbed him in his back. So I'll ask again, why are we punished for lethally disposing of these individuals when they could care less about Corvo? It doesn't help that the Loyalists kidnapped Emily yet again, purely because they want to manipulate and control her. The game believes it's wrong for Corvo to give these fascinating individuals a taste of their own medicine, essentially rejecting the idea that morality is ambiguous. One could also argue that morality is subjective, and the game simply disagrees with how I view it. But here's my conundrum. Even if you opt for the non-lethal playstyle, many of the non-lethal options result in fates worse than death. Campbell literally becomes a plague-infected individual if you dispose of him non-lethally. I'm sure he'd rather just be dead, if he even still possesses any sense of reason. Lady Boyle can be sent away with a man who's clearly very creepy, and God knows what he'll do with her now that he has unrestrained access to her. I'm sure Lady Boyle would rather be killed, but no, the game essentially tells you that it wants Campbell to get infected with the plague. It wants Lady Boyle to possibly be taken advantage of by a creepy person, because from the game's perspective, that's the correct option. That's the right thing to do, and outright killing them is somehow worse than that. Ultimately, Dishonored bravely introduces a morality system that only determines whether you're playing right or wrong by merely glancing at your kill count. It doesn't take into account the obscurity that resides within morality, which leads to conundrum after conundrum after conundrum. The Chaos system may lack nuance, but at least the gameplay doesn't lack quality. This wouldn't be a Dishonored video if I didn't mention a little something called player agency, which is just a fancy way of saying freedom. Like most games that offer immense player freedom, you can go into any level guns blazing and kill everyone, or you can take a stealthy, strategic approach. There's technically no right or wrong way to tackle objectives in this game, which naturally makes the game far more replayable, as it encourages exploration and risk-taking. Part of what makes exploration and risk-taking so enjoyable in this game is the sheer amount of verticality. You can stay on the ground, injecting fear into your opponents directly, or you can sling yourself across the rooftops like Spider-Man, planning their demise from a distance. I'm gonna be bold and say no game handles verticality better than the Dishonored series. Cyberpunk 2077 comes close with its double jump and air dash capabilities, but even it can't hold a candle to Dishonored when it comes to verticality. Verticality is very nice, but how exactly are you even reaching those heights in the first place? We can thank the Outsider for that, who graciously gifted us godly powers. The ability you'll be using the most is called Blink. It allows you to move from one location to another at the speed of light, which looks like teleportation from the eyes of your foes. Dishonored has more than just traversal abilities though. There's other abilities like Possession, which allows you to forcefully steal the bodies of rats and NPCs, making it possible for you to manipulate their positions, and even bypass places that Corvo himself wouldn't legally be able to enter, such as a wall of light for instance, which will instantaneously kill anyone who isn't authorized to pass it. Another ability you can use is Bend Time, which does exactly what it says it does. It quite literally allows you to bend time, whether it be merely slowing down time or stopping it completely. You can summon a swarm of rats, you can manipulate wind itself, and even see through walls, which can give you vital information regarding the postures of NPCs. What I like about these powers is that they're not there to just be used as weapons. They can be used as tools as well, which opens the door for some interesting and creative problem-solving possibilities. For instance, you can stop time and take out an entire room of people without them ever being aware of your presence. You can blink behind someone and strangle them until they're laying on the floor unconscious. You can possess an NPC and eject yourself from their body, in which you'll then have ample time to decide their fate. These powers open up many possibilities for how you can approach a situation. And while I do like to view these powers as tools, there's actual tools as well. There's a rewiring tool, allowing you to trick any machine into being on your side and fighting against your enemies. There's the insanely overpowered Spring Razor, which will instantly obliterate any NPC standing within its range. Corvo's sword, gun, and crossbow are pretty standard, but even they're cool, especially the way he wields them. It only takes one crouch to witness Corvo do a satisfying trick with his sword, something that one wouldn't think would be that big of a deal, but if it weren't in the game, you'd immediately start missing it. Everything I just mentioned about the gameplay is cool, but it doesn't mean a thing if it controls like any major Unreal Engine 5 game released in the past 4 years. I'm happy to say that that isn't the case in the slightest. This game has some of the best and most responsive controls I've ever experienced in a video game. The only game that rivals it in my opinion is Overwatch. Everything just works. It all flows together seamlessly, and in a way that's so satisfying that you'll wonder why all games don't control this well. They nailed the traversal in this game. It makes you feel like an assassin far better than any Assassin's Creed game ever could in my opinion. They also nailed the combat in this game. It has a traditional parry system that you see in most games, except this game's impressive responsiveness makes it more satisfying than most other games. And let me remind you, you're not limited to merely swinging your sword at your enemies, or implanting a bullet in their skull. You have all of Corvo's powers at your disposal, and you are more than welcome to use them in combat. It's no secret just how brutal Corvo can be in this game, and even as a huge fan of stealth, it's often more fun to experiment with these lethal tools, which is why I sometimes find myself confused about why the game actively punishes you for using them. Dishonored is widely regarded as a game that heavily emphasizes player agency, and for the most part, I agree. It gives the player freedom in the sense that you can tackle objectives however you please. There's no singular way to kill a target, maneuver through the level, or battle your foes. How you choose to do that depends entirely on your playstyle. Do you want to go in guns blazing and murder everyone in sight? You're more than free to do that. Want to be like Agent 47 and sneak around, taking out targets in the shadows? You're allowed to do that as well. But there's a difference between Agent 47 and Corvo Attano. 47 lacks the limitations that comes with having a sense of virtue. 47 is a man who was engineered to not care in the slightest about the morality within decision making. His goal is to get the job done, and how he chooses to do that is completely up to him. See an innocent, probably underpaid maid simply doing her job so she can pay the bills and want to kill her? Go for it. You're Agent 47. You can do whatever you want without worrying about whether what you did was right or wrong. Want to throw an explosive directly at a man's head and blow him to smithereens? Do it. The game won't fault you for using its tools to your advantage. The exact opposite can be said for Dishonored. Dishonored gives you many tools and powers to use to your heart's content. That is, if you opt for the high chaos playthrough. If you want to be more gentle in this game, taking out all your foes non-lethally, then you're actively missing out on a decent chunk of the gameplay mechanics this game has to offer. And suddenly, it stops feeling as free as people like to make it out to be. To adopt a non-lethal playstyle means to place limitations on yourself. It means to restrain yourself and reject a good number of the potential possibilities in this game you'd otherwise be able to experience. The truth is, the core gameplay of Dishonored seems to have taken a cue from the Joker's philosophy. Just like the Joker, Dishonored believes that true freedom comes from rejecting societal norms and moral standards. Chaos is the truest form of freedom. Once you adopt this mentality, suddenly the game opens up. You're no longer restrained by the limitations the game so desperately wants you to place on yourself. You can experience the extent of this game's mechanics without fear of being right or wrong. It's only when you finally lift this curtain off of yourself does the game truly become free. But even with this game becoming free, keep in mind that the game will not ignore your actions. Dishonored repeatedly tries to sell you on the idea that with every action, there is a consequence. Dunwall is not merely a game world that remains static. It transforms depending on how you go about playing it. Opt for a lethal playstyle and you'll quickly see more swarms of rats. Your relationships deteriorate right before your eyes, and the fate of Emily Caldwin will be much more gruesome. Let's start with the rat plague. More rats means more problems, because you know what rats are. They're scavengers that will eat anything thrown their way, including humans, whether they're dead or alive. By single-handedly worsening the rat plague, you're inadvertently harming more people than you may have originally intended. And don't try to switch up your playstyle once it's too late, because let me remind you, these rats don't care whether you're dead or alive. You can try to switch to a pacifist playstyle midway, but a number of those people you subdue are subject to being eaten alive thanks to the choices you made previously. Dunwall is too far gone at this point, and it's your fault. You forged this world, and now you have to sit there and live in your failure as you watch the world burn as a result of your actions. With that said, even though the world around you has deteriorated substantially, the world doesn't view you as bad. It doesn't view you in any type of way, actually. It does indeed speak to the player, but it has no soul. The ones that do have a soul are the people within this world, and they absolutely will alter their perspective of you depending on how you behave. Samuel's the first person that comes to mind. He expresses great disappointment in Corvo for essentially devolving into a mindless killer, and even goes as far as firing a warning shot so your enemies can be aware of your presence. Callista dies in high chaos, but lives in low, illustrating that there's good people perishing thanks to you. There are people having to bear the weight of your actions, and there's nobody bearing that weight more than Emily Caldwin. The final level takes every choice, every action you made throughout the game, and translates it into explorable geometry, in which it will either resemble Night City or Gotham City, both of which are shitty places, but one is prettier than the other. One is gruesome because it'll only go as far as poisoning people and trapping a child in a closet. The other is gruesome because it takes it a step further by throwing said child off the fucking map. And guess who could have prevented this? You. Things didn't have to be this way. There could have been a different outcome if you just did things a little differently. If you just walked instead of ran. If you jumped instead of flew. If you disengaged instead of engaged. You were given the gun, you chose to pull the trigger. And now you have to witness your daughter on the verge of death as she's being held 5 feet in the air by an old man. The game gave you a choice, and this is what you chose. But what happens when a person chooses the other path? What if a person started off questionable, but developed into a more upstanding individual over time? The answer to that question lives in Daud's story. The Knife of Dunwall presents Daud's journey to redemption after killing the Empress. Last time, we saw this from Corvo's perspective, but now, we can see it through the eyes of Daud himself. This shows that a simple perspective change can drastically alter how you view things. From Corvo's perspective, all we see is a villainous killer out to kill the Empress and kidnap her kid. But from Daud's perspective, we see instant regret. He knew he'd pay for this wrongdoing. It was only a matter of time. In the meantime, he embarks on a journey where he'll make it a priority to redeem himself for the bad things he's done. Daud's character and his journey is one of the only times this game directly highlights the ambiguity within morality. It's the first time the game seemingly agrees with the idea that context matters substantially when it comes to what's right and what's wrong. For Corvo, Daud is your average fictional villain, evil simply for the sake of being evil. But for Daud, he's a man who's been struck by the shackles of guilt. He deeply regrets his actions and is committed to ameliorating his reputation. The Knife of Dunwall opens up in a way that allows us to reasonably assume Corvo wouldn't simply turn a blind eye to this, even if it means killing Daud. The base game would fault Corvo for feeling this way, as if he's wrong for wanting revenge, as if he's wrong for wanting Daud to suffer the consequences of his actions. This highlights a significant tonal shift in the narrative. Even with this tonal shift, I still find myself battling with the conundrum, because the game still faults you for choosing to experience the only true form of freedom in this game, to reject morality. Just like the base game, choosing to go for the high chaos route will leave you with the quote-unquote bad ending, which contradicts the idea that morality is ambiguous. Why does the DLC open up in a way that leads us to believe it now understands that context matters when it comes to morality, then proceeds to reintroduce a morality system that only pays attention to the number of people you killed? Let's go down the roster of targets Daud is up against in these DLCs. Starting with Rothwild. He owns the slaughterhouse, which Daud chooses to investigate because of a ship named Delilah. Rothwild blatantly exploits his workers and even tortures and threatens them. He views his workers not as people, but as expendable resources. He's a businessman by definition, but at the expense of the hard-working people he could care less about. If Daud were to hypothetically kill this man to free these workers from his abuse, you're telling me the game will take Rothwild's side? Let's look at Barrister Timsh. He's simply a man who abuses his power. He uses his position to hurt the ones below him, and he's simply not redeemable in many of his actions. You could argue that handling him non-lethally would be the quote-unquote better option since it results in him getting sent to Coldridge Prison, but if you did choose to kill him, why does the game view you as such a terrible person? To put into perspective the type of person Timsh is, let's address one of his many questionable actions. He deliberately abused his authority by using false accusations of plague exposure to illegally seize property from healthy, living families. He would then give these properties to his friends and business associates. This man is ruining families, something I feel most would agree is not a particularly good thing to do. Yet the game is content with this. It draws the line at killing him though? What about Delilah herself? Well, in the Brigmore Witches, she's blatantly trying to possess Emily Caldwin. She's trying to take control of a literal child for her own selfish reasons. You can seal her away in the void, but if you did kill her, why does the game paint you as such a terrible person? By doing that, you saved a child, and without that child's existence, we wouldn't have gotten one of the greatest games of all time, Dishonored 2. So the story leads you to believe that it's willing to embrace contextual morality, but the gameplay says otherwise purely because it still ties ethics to a singular number. I'm aware that at the end of the day, it's just a game that real humans had to program. A game mechanic can't possibly take into account every single context and possibility within something as complex as morality, but that doesn't change anything I said. With that said, do these contradictions actually weaken the story itself? No, not even close. We live in a time period where critiquing a game is often written off as you hating said game, which couldn't be further from the truth. Dishonored is one of the greatest games of all time in my opinion. The Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches both take second place for my favorite DLC expansions of all time, with number 1 going to the Phantom Liberty from Cyberpunk 2077. Dishonored is a good game, a great game even. And there's something it does better than most games, and that's the ability to tell a story without saying a single word. Whether it be 2 plague-infected individuals who died in each other's arms, or the deliberate writing on the walls, highlighting the severe degradation of the city of Dunwall. Dishonored often says a lot without needing to actually speak. Continuing Daud's story, let's dive deeper into the Brigmore Witches. In the Dead Eels mission, we can see the everlasting battle between the Hatters and the Dead Eels. The gang war between the Dead Eels and the Hatters directly reflects the chaos within Dunwall, and Daud is right there at the center of it, watching it all go down. This makes me think about Daud's past with Dunwall, and how it may have shaped him into the person he once was. When you're around nothing but crime and violence for an extended period of time, it's bound to rub off on you eventually. Somewhere down the line, Daud must have picked up on this behavior, which served as the catalyst for him becoming a killer. When you research more about Daud, you'll learn that he was actually born on the island of Serkonos. It's unclear how he behaved while he was here, but he certainly wasn't a paid killer. It wasn't until he moved to Dunwall that he became a killer, which makes me think, what if he just stayed in Serkonos? Moving to Dunwall seemingly spiraled his descent into chaos. How would he have turned out if he never made that decision? If he never willingly surrounded himself with violence? Would he have been a much more respectable person from the start? Would there have even been a need for a redemption story? This illustrates how it only takes one bad decision to completely alter the trajectory of your life. Daud became the personification of living long enough to see yourself become the villain, and he also made it a priority to become the personification of a hero can be anyone, even a man doing something as simple and reassuring as putting a coat around a young boy's shoulders to let him know the world hadn't ended, or in this case, saving Emily's life. Daud is living proof that a man can change for the better, and that's further showcased once he makes his way to the Brigmore Manor. This is easily the most beautiful level in the entire game. It sacrifices some of the verticality that I love throughout the game, but absolutely makes up for it in visuals. It feels like Daud has jumped into a painting, an artificial world where the colors are more exaggerated, the blades of grass are sharper, and the eerie vibe of the manor is much more potent than it otherwise would be. The witches that wander the residence adds to this feeling of this world being a fantasy, as they've clearly transcended the limitations of normal human beings. The level has a dreamlike filter placed over it, almost making it feel like this is all a mere hallucination, a facade trying its best to imitate reality. I could never get tired of wandering around the perimeter of the manor. Certain parts of it remind me of Batman Arkham Asylum, and it even leaves me with the same uneasy feeling that game does, which makes me wonder if Arkham Asylum inspired this level even a little bit. Things only get more creepy once you actually enter the manor. This place has clearly seen better days, as it's blatantly falling apart and is infested with witches and supernatural creatures. There's entire regions of this manor covered in moss, stones, water, mildew, and debris from decaying materials that lay the foundation of the residence. You'll eventually get your hands on a lantern. Upon discovering an empty canvas in the gallery, you can use said lantern to illuminate the painting. Earlier I said it feels like Daud has entered a painting. Well, now he actually enters a painting, and the characteristics I just mentioned become much more extreme. It's a beautiful level, but is that all there is to it? I don't think so. I like to view this level as much more than simply being beautiful. It uses level design and atmosphere to mirror Daud's inner journey from guilt to redemption. Its painting-like aesthetic correlates to the themes of illusion versus reality, and how Daud and Delilah attempt to rewrite reality. Delilah attempts to do this through possession of Emily, while Daud does it through guilt and redemption. The level's vibe and atmosphere mirrors these themes, which heightens the emotional weight within the level. It feels like it transcends merely being a game level, and becomes the exemplification of the desire to alter reality. The choice to seal Delilah in the void rather than outright killing her reinforces Daud's moral evolution. He completes his mission in a deliberate way, rather than resorting to the ruthless violence that defined his past, and the serene yet eerie vibe of the level further elucidates this. Daud is a different person than he was when he killed Jessamine, and this level reflects that to a great extent. If you could turn a metaphor into a level, this is the level you would get. It makes me glad that the low chaos ending has Corvo allowing Daud to live, because he's shown us that he deserves a second chance. It also shows us that Corvo is sympathetic and is willing to give a second chance to even his worst enemies, without even being aware of the fact that they even had a redemption arc, and will remain unaware until the second game. It's a theme that highlights the fact that us as humans will inevitably have to make difficult choices in our lives, and the choices we make are a direct reflection of our character. Dishonored is easily one of the most uniquely crafted games of all time. The way the themes are interwoven into the gameplay, and the way the world was manufactured is nothing short of phenomenal. I've never seen a game whose world was so meticulously made, and whose mechanics directly reflect the moral dilemmas us humans face prior to Dishonored. It also takes storytelling to the next level with the DLC. The way they developed Daud was so well done that I could go as far as saying he's the best character in this entire series. We live in a time where a lot of bigger budget games feel way too safe, so it's refreshing to go back to a game that blatantly challenges the player's ethics. There's a reason this game has been talked about endlessly ever since it came out. This is merely one of the billions of video essays on this game, and it will certainly not be the last. I'm not going to call this game a masterpiece. There's areas it can be improved, but to say this game is anything other than amazing is blasphemy. If you enjoyed this video even a little bit, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. Until next time, thanks for watching.